continued. By the time the sun slid behind the serrated ridges and painted the sky in rust and bruised violet, Mara Quinn had learned not to expect kindness from men who measured a woman by what she could give them, not by who she was. She had learned that lesson in kitchens where she scrubbed grease from other people's sins, in fields where her hands bled and no one noticed, in rooms where promises were made softly and broken loudly. To them, she was too quiet, too plain, too stubborn, too damaged, too something that never fit the shape of what they wanted. Useless, they said with their eyes even when their mouths were polite. And so when the truck rattled into the Apache lands with a cough of dust and a limp that matched the driver's, Mara assumed this would be no different. Another stop, another man who would see her as temporary help, another place where she would work until her back screamed and her heart learned to go numb again. The rancher stepped out slowly, favoring his left leg, his shadow long and uneven on the ground. He was older than she expected, his hair threaded with silver, his face carved by sun and sorrow, eyes dark and measuring but not cruel. He watched her the way someone watches weather, not judging, just understanding that it will come whether you invite it or not. When he spoke, his voice was low, carrying the cadence of Apache words even when he used English, and he didn't ask her what she could do first, he asked her name, like it mattered. That should have been the first warning that this place would undo her. The ranch was broken in a way she recognized immediately. Fences bowed, barns patched with whatever could be found, horses that trusted no one because too many had failed them. The man introduced himself as Tomas Red Hawk, and there was something in the way he said it that told her he had once been whole and was now learning how to live with the pieces. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered work. Honest work. And when she took it, he nodded once, as if sealing a quiet pact between two people the world had already dismissed. Days bled into each other with the rhythm of survival, feeding, mending, cleaning, listening to the wind speak in a language older than pain. Tomas never hovered, never corrected her unless she asked, and when he did, it was with patience that felt like a balm she hadn't known she needed. Other men had demanded smiles, gratitude, softness, Tomas demanded only truth. When she failed, he didn't sigh. When she succeeded, he didn't praise loudly. He simply noticed. And being noticed like that, without hunger, without expectation, terrified her more than cruelty ever had. One night, after a storm tore through the valley and left the land raw and steaming, she found him sitting alone by the corral, the ache in his leg written clearly in the way he held himself. She brought him coffee without being asked, and when he thanked her, something in his voice cracked just enough to let the hurt show. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his presence, far enough to protect herself, and for the first time in years, silence didn't feel like a threat. He told her about the accident that took his strength and the people who took the rest, about how men like him were supposed to be unbreakable and how the world doesn't forgive those who bend instead of shatter. She didn't tell him her story, she didn't have to. He looked at her like he already knew it, like broken recognizes broken without needing an introduction. When the moon rose high and pale, he said something that lodged in her chest and refused to leave. This land doesn't need perfection, he said. It needs people who stay. She wanted to laugh at that, wanted to remind him that people like her were never chosen, only tolerated. But as days turned into weeks, the ranch began to breathe again, and so did she. She fixed things she didn't know could be fixed. She stood her ground when others passed through and dismissed her with a glance. And every time she caught Tomas watching her, not with ownership, not with desire, but with something like respect, her old belief that she was useless began to crack. The moment came quietly, the way truth often does. A man from town sneered at her, called her dead weight, suggested Tomas would be better off hiring someone stronger, prettier, easier. Tomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "She's perfect for this place. And for me." The words hit Mara like thunder, shaking loose every lie she had ever been taught to believe. Perfect, not despite her scars, not if she changed, but as she was. And as she stood there, the wind lifting her hair, the land stretching wide and waiting, she realized this was not a rescue story. It was a choosing. If this chapter moved you, if you feel the weight of being unseen and the power of being chosen, stay with us, subscribe to the channel and walk with these stories of broken people finding where they belong, because sometimes the story you need most is the one that reminds you that you were never useless at all. The morning sun spilled gold over the Apache Valley, cutting across the rugged landscape and painting every ridge and trough with a warmth that had been absent for years. Mara stood at the edge of the corral, hands calloused but steady, her hair tied back against the wind. She watched Tomas move among the horses, each step careful yet deliberate, the limp he bore barely slowing him down. It was strange, she thought, how someone could carry so much visible pain yet radiate strength in ways that didn't feel like force, but like presence itself. Weeks had passed since Tomas had spoken those words, "You're perfect for me." And Mara's world had shifted subtly, like the tide brushing against a shore she hadn't known was there. She no longer measured herself against every sneer or whispered dismissal from men who never cared to see her. She measured herself against the land, against the rhythm of work, and against Tomas, whose patience and quiet devotion were teaching her something she had almost forgotten, that she was capable of being loved, truly and entirely, for who she was. But life on the ranch was never gentle. That afternoon, a rider from town arrived, bringing news that threatened to undo the fragile peace Mara had begun to treasure. The land Tomas had worked so hard to reclaim was in jeopardy. Developers were buying up plots nearby, and they had their eyes on the Apache Valley, a place that had survived generations, a place Tomas had fought to preserve. Mara felt a familiar surge of anxiety, the old fear that the world didn't care for people like her. Or for people like Tomas, for that matter. "This is serious," the rider said, dismounting roughly, dust clinging to his boots. "They're offering a price that could ruin everything if you refuse. And some of the neighbors, they're talking about selling." Tomas's jaw tightened. Mara could see the tension ripple through him, the way his hands flexed at his sides. But he didn't panic, didn't lose control. Instead, he looked at Mara, and she knew without words what he expected. "We fight for what matters," he said, and the certainty in his voice grounded her, gave her courage she didn't realize she'd lost. They worked late into the night, poring over maps, speaking with lawyers, talking to neighbors. Mara saw a side of Tomas few people ever saw, the fierce protector, the man who would go to the edge of the world for what he loved. And she realized that he wasn't fighting just for the land. He was fighting for the life they had begun to build together, for a future that included her in ways the world had never imagined. But the stress, the fear, the looming threat, it took a toll. One evening, after hours of arguing with a stubborn neighbor over property lines, Tomas collapsed into the chair in the barn, exhaustion etched into his face. Mara rushed to his side, pressing a hand to his shoulder, feeling the tension that had always been hidden beneath the surface. "You're pushing too hard," she said softly. "You need to rest." He shook his head, a faint, ironic smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We don't have the luxury of rest, Mara. Not now." She met his eyes, searching for the men who had once seemed invincible in his quiet way. And then she said the words she had been holding back, the words she had whispered to herself when no one was listening, "Then let me fight with you. Let me be part of this. We're stronger together." For the first time, Tomas hesitated. He studied her face, the determination in her eyes, and something softened. "I don't want to put you in danger," he said, almost a whisper. "You're already in danger," Mara replied. "And I'm not useless. Not to you. Not to this land. Not to us." And in that moment, the air between them changed. It wasn't just partnership or shared work, it was the acknowledgement that they were each other's anchor, each other's home. And for Mara, that realization was more powerful than any victory over the outside world could ever be. Days bled into weeks, and the battle for the land intensified. Mara worked tirelessly alongside Tomas, navigating meetings, dealing with threats, and even confronting those who had once doubted her worth. Every challenge became a proving ground, not for anyone else, but for herself. She discovered reservoirs of strength she had never tapped, and in the process, she realized the truth that had been hidden behind every insult and dismissal she had endured. Being seen, truly seen, had always been her greatest power. One night, after a long day of negotiations, Mara and Tomas stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. The moon rose silver and luminous, bathing the land in ethereal light. Tomas leaned heavily on his cane, and Mara moved to support him, their hands brushing, lingering. "We did it," she whispered, though the fight wasn't entirely over. But for the first time, victory felt real, tangible, possible. Tomas turned to her, the shadows and moonlight playing across his face. "No," he said gently, "we did it together. You made me stronger, Mara. You made me believe in more than surviving." Her heart stuttered. I I never believed I could be enough, she admitted, voice trembling. For anyone. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch steady and grounding. You are enough, he said simply. Perfect, even. Not for what you do, not for what you can give, but for who you are. I see you. I choose you. Every day. And in that declaration, Mara felt something she had never allowed herself to feel, complete surrender to the possibility of love, not as a dream, not as a wish, but as a reality. She leaned into him, their foreheads touching, hearts beating in tandem, the world around them fading to the quiet rhythm of trust, of belonging. In the weeks that followed, life on the ranch settled into a new, delicate harmony. Mara and Tomas continued to restore the land, protect it, and grow together, learning to navigate not just the physical hardships but the emotional landscapes they had both carried for so long. And every time Mara caught Tomas watching her, not with expectation, not with hunger, but with deep, unwavering respect, she felt the weight of her old fears lift a little more. The story of Mara Quinn, the woman who had been deemed useless by every man she'd ever met, was no longer about survival. It was about recognition, choice, and the transformative power of someone seeing you as perfect, just as you are. She had learned that love wasn't about changing to fit someone else's image. It was about being seen, being chosen, and standing together in the face of a world that didn't always notice. And as the sun set over the Apache Valley, painting the sky in streaks of fire and lavender, Mara realized she was no longer running from life. She was living it, fully, fiercely, and irrevocably. And Tomas, the broken rancher who had once carried his own scars silently, was by her side, proof that even the most fractured souls could find wholeness in one another. If Mara's journey inspired you, if you've ever felt unseen or undervalued, subscribe to the channel. Walk with us through more stories of resilience, love, and the courage to be chosen. Because sometimes, the story you need most is the one that reminds you, no one is ever truly useless, and the right person will see you as perfect, exactly as you are.